Spells in Clash Royale are one of the most underrated and misunderstood parts of the entire game. Everyone thinks they know how to use them until they waste a 4 elixir fireball on a single musketeer and then immediately get 3 crowned. A well-timed and placed spell can swing an entire game in your favor, and on the other hand, a poor timing or placement can make you question every life decision that led to you downloading the game. Today we're going over every spell in Clash Royale, how to actually use them properly, avoid the rookie mistakes, and maybe even pull off some plays that'll make your opponent rage quit in disbelief. Before we jump into the first spell, here are a couple of general tips that'll be useful for almost any spell you choose. First, anytime you use a spell in Clash Royale, the goal should be to get as much value as possible. When people say value, they essentially mean how much elixir was countered with the spell. For example, if I were to fireball a lone firecracker, that would be a -1 elixir trade for me, since the fireball costs 4 elixir and the firecracker only costs 3. On the other hand, if I hit the firecracker and my opponent's crown tower, now it's a bit more justifiable since that tower damage was likely worth that 1 extra elixir to me. And better still would be situations like if you were to see a wizard and some barbarians all in one spot, in which case you would essentially kill 10 elixir for the price of 4 with your fireball, which means you got really good value with that spell placement. The second general tip is that it's very important to wait a couple seconds when you see someone place something you want to use a spell on, because more often than not, your opponent will give you more value by placing something else, even if it has a lot of HP and won't outright go down within the radius of the spell. This ties into the first tip about always trying to get the most value out of your spells, since waiting for more troops to hit with a single spell will automatically mean you got more value. Now don't take this too far and wait forever to place your spell, because when the timing is right, you want to jump on it and definitely send that spell in. Then the third and final general tip would be to pay attention to lead times with your spells. What I mean by this is that some spells like the Zap are deployed effectively instantly, with others like the Rocket taking up to 5 seconds from when you deploy the card to when it lands, so getting familiar with those lead times on each spell is super important to ensure you have good aim and actually hit what you're trying to hit with the spell. And with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first spell. Arrows were once a card that was overshadowed by the Zap because it was more expensive and didn't stun. But that all changed a few years back when the arrows were reworked to deal 3 waves of damage, meaning they would completely eliminate the guards as well as cloned units like the Lava Hound or Golem that split into multiples. So when considering how to use the arrows, we need to keep those 3 waves of damage in mind. At tournament standard, the arrows deal 3 waves of 122 damage for a total of 366 damage overall. The most notable cards that the arrows are amazing against are the Firecracker and the Archers, since they both have a bit more health than swarm cards and therefore will survive a log or zap, leaving arrows as the only option to completely wipe them out, no questions asked. When using the arrows, that general tip I gave earlier about being patient is perhaps the most important with this card specifically, since that large spell radius can hit so many things at once, often leaving patient players with the opportunity to not only take out a firecracker or some archers, but also get chip damage on the tower and hopefully a couple of other troops as well. Arrows overall are deployed pretty quickly, so you don't need to lead your placements as much as you might with some other spells like the fireball or rocket. And one interesting interaction to note is that the arrows can actually be used in conjunction with the Golden Knight's dash ability to eliminate any troop with health less than or equal to the Little Prince, which has 698 health at tournament standard. Using this combo can often give you the upper hand in battles where your opponent doesn't realize that this will barely be enough to take something out. The Zap is probably one of the most versatile spells in the entire game, yet it's also one of the easiest to waste. At only 2 elixir, the Zap deals instant damage in a small radius and also stuns troops for half a second. This might not sound like much, but that half second can completely change how a push plays out. You want to use the Zap primarily against swarms like the Skeleton Army, Bats, or Goblin Gang, but also to reset things like the Sparky, Inferno Tower, and Mighty Miner. The stun completely interrupts their charge or beam, and that single reset can easily save your win condition, especially the more tanky ones. The Zap is also one of only a couple of spells that can reset the charging mechanic of the Dark Prince, Ram Rider, and Evolved Recruits. The biggest mistake players make with the Zap is reacting too early. As mentioned earlier, if you zap a Skeleton Army the moment you see it, your opponent might drop another card into the same lane and you lose that potential extra value. So unless your tower is facing an immediate threat like a Skarmy directly on it, it's best to wait half a second for more units to appear. One of the best uses of the Zap is to get rid of the first wave of spawns from the Witch or Night Witch so that your troops can immediately target and kill the opponent's Witch without getting distracted indefinitely by the skeletons. This spell can also be extremely effective during same kind troop interactions. For example, if you and your opponent both place a P.E.K.K.A. and they end up attacking each other at the bridge, the Zap's small damage and stun effect will guarantee that your troop wins the interaction and stays alive to potentially make it to the tower. As for the Evolved Zap, it's a completely different beast. When you unlock the evolution, Zap's radius gets larger and it hits multiple times in quick succession. This makes it insanely strong against grouped units like the Minion Horde or Goblin Gang, and it also extends the stun duration, meaning you can shut down ramp up damage like the Inferno Tower even more reliably. The Zap evolution pairs extremely well with the Evolved Royal Giant, since your opponent's counters will be zapped and nearly frozen for a short time while being hit with the Royal Giant's recoil damage too. This combo can often severely damage or even take out your opponent's tower in one go, allowing an insane advantage to the player. One thing to avoid with the evolved zap though is playing it too close to the king tower or essentially behind the opponent's crown tower at all, since the expanding radius on the second zap may end up hitting their king tower and activating it. Fireball is the quintessential mid-cost spell. 4 elixir, massive value potential, and one of the most satisfying cards to land perfectly. The golden rule for the fireball is to hit at least 2 things. Hitting 1 troop in the tower is good, but hitting 3 or more troops plus the tower is what gives the spell incredible value and can turn the tide of entire matches. The fireball does 688 damage at tournament standard, making the most common and valuable targets that will die in one shot the Magic Archer, Mother Witch, Flying Machine, and Zappies. Since those units all cost 4 elixir, you're getting at least an even trade if they're alone, but if you can also hit the tower or some other nearby troops, you're getting more than you're paying for with this spell. One important thing to know with the fireball is the cards that seem like they would die to it but actually survive with a sliver of health. Most notably, these are the Witch, Night Witch, Electro Wizard, Hunter, Musketeer, and Wizard. The fireball has a medium travel time after playing the card, so you will need to lead your shots slightly. Usually you'll want to place it just ahead of fast troops like the Minion Horde or Dark Goblin, usually a tile or 2, as this ensures that they run into the blast instead of dodging it. Another crucial thing to remember with the fireball is that it deals pretty substantial knockback to light or medium weight units, with this knockback only not affecting super heavy cards like the P.E.K.K.A. and Golem. If you get creative, this knockback can serve some pretty crucial functions. For example, you can fully counter a balloon in a pinch by aiming for the bottom of the incoming balloon's shadow. This will cause your fireball to hit the front of the balloon and knock it back as much as it can, resulting in the balloon barely dying before connecting, although you will still take damage from the death bomb. The other priceless interaction with this knockback is using the fireball to knock back an Inferno Dragon, which will push it slightly out of range and reset its ramp up damage while nearly taking it out altogether. The log is one of the most used spells in the entire game even to this day, and for good reason. At only 2 elixir, it's a low cost spell that rolls across the arena, knocking back and damaging everything on the ground. The log is very easy to get a lot of value with, as you can fully take out a skeleton army, Goblin Barrel, Goblin Gang, or Princess, which are all +1 trades. And on top of that, most of those interactions I just mentioned can be played in such a way where the log then gets some chip damage on the tower as well, 40 damage to be exact at tournament standard. The main thing to focus on when using the log is to get as much value as possible since it has such a large area of effect. In addition to the solid damage that the log inflicts, it also deals knockback to every card in the game no matter how heavy. This knockback is not only universal, but it's also directional, meaning you can knock troops to the side if you hit them with the edge of the log, or you can actually even knock them forward by landing the log right on top of them at the correct time. This nuance makes the log a much more skilled card than it appears on the surface, with so many possibilities of use instead of the simple spell many think it to be. The biggest downside of the log is obviously that it doesn't hit air, so in matchups against air-based decks like Lava Hound, it'll get almost no value except for the small chip damage on the opponent's tower. Technically, you could use the vines on the air troops and then the log could hit them, but that'd be a tougher situation to justify spending all that elixir on. I have a feeling when the evolved log comes out, it's going to be pretty crazy, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The Barbarian Barrel is a very interesting alternative to the log. It sacrifices a few things for the added bonus of spawning a single barbarian upon reaching the end of its path. One of those sacrifices is a tiny bit of damage, with the barrel doing 240 at tournament standard instead of 266 for the log. So for example, both the log and Barb Barrel will kill a Goblin Barrel, but a Princess will survive the Barbarian Barrel, but not the log. In most cases, the surviving Barbarian will finish off the Princess anyway, depending on how you place it, but it's worth knowing which units will survive the Barb Barrel so you don't just think about it as a different log. The other compromise is roll distance. The Barbarian Barrel only rolls for 4.5 tiles as opposed to the 10.1 tiles that the log rolls, which not only means you can hit less things, but you also don't have the option to chip the tower, at least not directly. The reason I say directly is that the Barbarian Barrel can actually work well with a bridge spam type card, where you play it at the bridge, for example into a skeleton army, which it will kill, but then you also have the Barbarian that is only a few tiles away from the tower already. This will force your opponent to defend it if they are using the Tower Princess or Royal Chef, as otherwise the Barbarian will get a hit and deal 192 damage at tournament standard. This card also does not deal any knockback, which is definitely one of the biggest trade-offs between it and the log. It's still an amazing alternative in the right deck though. For example, many players like to use it with the Battle Ram, as the Barb Barrel can eliminate ground swarms like the log, allowing the ram to connect with the tower, but it also adds a third Barbarian to the mix once the ram breaks, which adds just that much more pressure. The main advantage here is that it deals similar ground damage to the log and gives you a unit after. This makes it great in bridge spam or control decks. For example, you can roll it onto a Goblin Barrel or Skeleton army and the spawned Barbarian will keep tanking or help counterpush. Because the barrel rolls a shorter distance, you can't rely on it for long range chip like the log, as it's not guaranteed, but it's more flexible defensively when you need a quick body. The giant Snowball is one of those cards that looks super weak on paper, but it's actually one of the better utility spells in the game. It definitely has some tough competition, being directly compared to the zap and the log since they're all 2 elixir. The giant Snowball deals light splash damage in addition to a slow effect, just like the Ice Wizard's slow effect. You can use it to delay troops, knock back fast units like the Hog Rider, or slow down high threat pushes like a balloon or battle ramp. This versatility of having knockback, damage, and slowdown is what makes the Snowball a bit more versatile than you might initially think. The best use of the Snowball on defense is typically against minions or more often the minion horde. This is because between the damage, knockback, and the slow effect, it'll usually synergize just right with your tower to completely take them out for a positive elixir trade. It's also very useful when your opponent's push includes bats, since it'll take them out instantly just like the zap, in addition to slowing the rest of the push down and maybe knocking some of it back. This effect becomes much more pronounced when using the Snowball's evolution, which causes it to roll for 4.5 tiles after landing, just as much as a Barbarian Barrel. Not only that, but it picks up any troops it rolls past and drops them off at the end of its roll, meaning it's just that much better than the normal Snowball at slowing things down and pushing your opponent's pushes back away from your tower. The most famous synergy for the evolved Snowball is with the X-Bow. Since the troops inside the Snowball are untargetable, an X-Bow at the bridge will lock onto the tower while the troops are inside and temporarily not in play, which can lead to some insane comebacks and tight games. Even if you aren't using X-Bow, the same principle can be applied to purposely cause your troops or tower to retarget. And along those same lines, you can also use the Snowball to move troops to the side one tile by hitting them with the edge of the Snowball. For example, if you misplace your building when countering an incoming Hog Rider, you can place the evolved Snowball a bit to the side to drag the Hog into the proper position to get pulled by the building. The Rocket is the definition of a high-risk, high-reward spell. At 6 elixir, it's one of the most expensive spells in the game, and it can be hard to land it properly since it has a full 5-second delay after playing the card before it lands. In addition, the damage area is pretty much the smallest of any spell, but when you do hit everything just right, it can be absolutely devastating for your opponent and give you some unbelievable elixir trades. Use the Rocket mainly against medium to high HP support troops, think Wizard, Executioner, Magic Archer, or 3 Musketeers. It's also one of the few cards that can completely shut down the Elixir Collector and X-Bow if timed right. The trick to mastering the Rocket is predictive placement. You want to anticipate your opponent stacking troops near their tower or their win condition. If you can hit both the support and the tower, that's a huge win. One pro level tip, Rocket can be used reactively to defend. If your opponent drops a Lumberjack and a Balloon, you can Rocket it all if your timing is perfect. It's risky, but if you can nail it, that's an easy +3 trade with no damage on your tower. The Rocket is also a very good safety net for tighter games that go into overtime, since it does 371 damage to crown towers at tournament standard, going all the way up to 541 damage at maximum level. The most deadly synergy with the Rocket is the Tornado, since it can pull everything into the radius of the Rocket for a complete deletion of almost any push. The timing is a little counterintuitive at first, but you'll want to play your Rocket like normal, and then about 1.5 to 2 seconds before it lands, you'll Tornado on the same tile. This will pull everything into range right as the Rocket lands, causing a devastating blow to their push, if any of it even survives at all. The Lightning spell is a spell that's a bit situational compared to the Rocket, since it'll only hit a maximum of 3 units, those with the highest HP within its radius. That being said, the damage it does to each target is very high, 1057 at tournament standard, and the radius of the spell is much larger. This spell is often used in Electro Giant and Royal Giant decks, and for good reason. When your opponent plays, say, a Musketeer and a Cannon to defend your push, you can often place your Lightning in such a way where it takes both of those out and hits the tower on top of that, dealing 286 damage to the tower at tournament standard. Not only is that a positive elixir trade, but it can often surprise your opponent or just catch them off guard enough to where they don't have anything else to defend with, and you get massive damage, if not just taking the tower outright. On top of that, the Lightning also has a stun effect equal to that of the Zap, meaning it'll reset ramp up cards like the Inferno Tower, leaving them unlikely to take out your tanks before going down. Keep in mind that your opponent can Lightning block by placing lower health units like Goblins near the tower when it's at extremely low HP, since your Lightning will target the Goblins if they have more HP than the tower. So when you're using the Lightning spell to deal the finishing blow to a tower in overtime, make sure to place it so that only the corner is touching the tower to make it less likely that your opponent can block it. The Poison is one of the most underrated control spells in the game. Unlike Fireball or Rocket, it doesn't do burst damage all at once, but instead creates a damage over time zone for 8 seconds. The key to Poison is denying space. If your opponent drops something like a Graveyard or Big Push behind their tank, use Poison to make that entire area unplayable. It forces them to either move their push elsewhere or lose most everything inside it. The other thing that sets this spell apart from others is that it has a 15% slowdown effect on anything within its radius, which can keep troops in the poison for longer and also just buy you time to get more elixir to defend or push with. Since this spell is damage over time and not instant, Supercell gave it more damage than the Fireball, so it will kill Wizards and Musketeers outright if they take all 8 ticks of damage. Poison is pretty much the hardest counter there is to the Graveyard, since it'll kill skeletons as they spawn and has a similar radius but for a lower cost than the Graveyard. So if you're using the Poison and your opponent has a Graveyard, you can pretty much just sit back and relax because it's going to be nearly impossible for them to get much damage with it. Poison is also very strong against siege decks like the X-Bow and Mortar, since it can do solid damage to the building and any defending swarms at the same time for a relatively low cost. The freeze spell is one of the most punishing spells in the entire game when used correctly, and one of the most embarrassing when used incorrectly. The classic mistake is freezing too early. Your opponent drops skeletons or bats after you freeze, and suddenly your balloon push is completely cooked. The correct way to use freeze is to wait until everything you want frozen is in range, tower towers, troops, whatever, and then drop it instantly. Since the freeze does do a bit of damage, it's able to kill bats and skeletons outright while chipping away at the tower and some other units. For example, with the balloon, placing your freeze at the right time can completely devastate your opponent's tower, especially if they're low on elixir. The freeze lasts 4 seconds, so that's more than enough time for your balloon, graveyard, or hog rider to dish out massive damage if your opponent doesn't force out some more elixir on defense. You can also use the freeze defensively, especially against fast pushes like the hog rider or elite barbarians, where you can drop something like a mini P.E.K.K.A. or lumberjack on top of them and then freeze, buying time for your defense to take out their push and also preserving their health for a counter push. The rage spell is one of the most straightforward spells in Clash Royale. Drop it and everything inside goes berserk. It increases movement and attack speed by 30% for 4.5 seconds, which can make cards like the balloon, elite barbarians, or lumberjack absolutely destructive. The trick is timing. Drop your rage spell as your troops cross the bridge or even slightly after rather than before. That way you can maximize the time they're actually hitting the tower while under the rage spell's effect. Just like the freeze spell, you can often be rewarded by being a bit patient, since the rage spell now does damage as well and will also kill skeletons and bats instantly, often completely changing the outcome of your push. The rage spell can also be used defensively, especially with it doing damage now, but you'll only really want to use it to kill low health units like a skeleton army for a positive trade, or if you're raging up multiple defensive troops and the tower all at once. The tornado is arguably one of the most skill dependent spells in the game. It pulls all troops in its radius towards the center, which is obviously great for grouping enemy troops together for a lot more value with your splash cards or even other spells, but it's also the most reliable card for activating your king tower in a number of different ways. Some of the easiest king tower activations to pull off are against the hog rider, balloon, and miner, as all you have to do with these is wait for the right time and place the spell on the correct tile. Not only will the troop get killed quickly once all 3 towers are targeting it, but the king tower activation will also help you for the rest of the match against most decks. Offensively, Tornado shines when paired with splash units like the baby dragon, executioner, or bowler. It lines everything up so your splash units hit multiple targets at once, maximizing their value. There is a reason why the executioner tornado combo is so iconic and widely used, because it's just that good. Another amazing use for the tornado is lining up your magic archer shots, as since the magic archer's arrows pierce infinitely, all you have to do is place him at the bridge and place a tornado a couple tiles in front of him, and he'll do some solid damage to both the opponent's push and their tower. Another popular use for the tornado is to pull troops closer to your push when they have an advantage by being far away. For example, if your opponent plays a fisherman to pull your royal giant, you can tornado the fisherman towards your royal giant so that he won't be pulled. This also works well with the electro giant, since you can pull ranged units into his electric aura so that they'll actually take damage from it and hopefully get taken out. Another obvious example is the evolved archers. Since they do so much more damage when far away from their targets, you can pull them a lot closer so that they effectively just become normal archers. And perhaps one of the most important things to note with the tornado is that the distance a given troop is pulled is heavily dependent on its mass. What's mass, you ask? Mass is a hidden value in Clash Royale that means exactly what you think it does. Mass is simply a number that tells the game how heavy a card is. Why does this matter, you ask? Well, mass is used to calculate how much, if at all, a troop will get pushed back after being knocked back by either a spell or another troop like the monk or mega knight. In general, cards with a higher mass push others out of the way, while lower mass troops get shoved around more easily. Most of you watching this right now have already probably found this out intuitively by just playing the game and taking notice when a card gets pushed back versus when they don't. For example, it makes perfect sense that a P.E.K.K.A. or Golem would have a high mass value and be more resistant to being pushed around, just like it makes sense that a small card like the Firecracker would be pretty easy to push around. To be more specific, cards like the P.E.K.K.A., Mega Knight, Royal Giant, and Giant Skeleton all have a mass of 18, which is very high. Then bats, skeletons, guards, all the spirit cards, and some others have a mass of only 1, which means they'll always take knockback from anything that can possibly deal it to them. For example, you'd think the Lava Hound would be heavy like a Golem since it costs 7 elixir and is a large, slow-moving card. Well, you'd actually be wrong, since the Lava Hound and her pups all have a weight of just 5, which is actually quite low and means they can be pushed around pretty easily. The same is true with the Goblin Brawler, as he seems pretty beefy at first, but he actually only has a weight of 2 and can therefore be knocked back by almost anything. If you're interested in seeing the mass of every card in the game, I've linked the wiki page in the description down below. And if you're interested in which cards are even capable of applying knockback in the first place, there are only 9 of them in the game currently, those being the Fireball, Snowball, Rocket, Tornado, Bowler, Log, Mega Knight, Little Prince, and Monk. One important thing to know though is that it isn't always as simple as which card has the higher mass value, as movement speed can also play a role. Take the Hog Rider and the Ice Golem for example. The Ice Golem has slightly more mass than the Hog Rider, but the hog moves so fast that it pushes the ice golem out of the way anyway. Speed can override small differences in mass, which is why pushes sometimes feel inconsistent. Along those same lines, heavy cards like the P.E.K.K.A. are a bit harder to nudge out of the way by placing another card between it and the tower, although it still can be done with the right placement and timing. Another thing to think about is that a card being lightweight isn't always a bad thing. For example, let's look at the ice golem versus the P.E.K.K.A. Normally, the ice golem is an easy kite tool. Drop it in the opposite lane, and the P.E.K.K.A. will follow it across the map, wasting 7 elixir. But what if a battle ram gets involved? The battle ram has a mass of 6, the P.E.K.K.A. has a mass of 18, and the ice golem sits at 6. When they all collide, the interaction locks them in place for just long enough that the ice golem slips out of the P.E.K.K.A.'s range. Suddenly, that 2 elixir ice golem is wasted, and the P.E.K.K.A. is marching towards your tower anyway. That's the power of hidden mechanics at work. For the Snowball, Fireball, and Rocket, the knockback is essentially the same between them, but the Tornado and the Log are unique cases. As for the Tornado, it'll easily pull small cards like the Skeletons as far away as it possibly can since they're so light, but using it on a heavy card like the Giant Skeleton will barely do anything at all. The Log is even more unique, as the attribute that makes the card legendary is the fact that it'll knock back any card no matter how heavy. So why does all of this matter for you? Well, because mass quietly decides how effective your pushes are, how well kites work, and even how valuable your elixir trades are. Knowing that a Hog Rider can slip past an ice golem, or that the Tornado won't budge a golem much, gives you a massive edge in predicting how each interaction will play out. At the end of the day, mass is one of Clash Royale's most overlooked stats, but once you start paying attention, you'll notice it in every single game. The Earthquake is actually a pretty underrated spell, and it's one of the best counters to small swarms and buildings, especially for only 3 elixir. If I had to explain the spell to you in one sentence, I'd say it's essentially a poison spell for 3 elixir, except it can't hit air and does less damage, but it slows things down way more and also does a lot more damage to buildings and crown towers. To be clear, the Earthquake does 3 waves of 84 damage at tournament standard for a total of 252, 3 waves of 287 damage for a total of 861 to buildings, and 3 waves of 53 damage for a total of 159 to crown towers at tournament standard. There is a reason that this spell is only typically used with the Hog Rider, since people are often using cheaper buildings like the Tombstone or Hidden Tesla to defend the Hog. This is because the Earthquake can be dropped right on top of usually both the tower and the building, doing massive damage to both and a bit of damage to any other defending troops in the area. This spell has the added benefit of being the only card in the game that can damage the Hidden Tesla while it's underground, making it a very strong counter to that card in particular. Most of the time, once you get a feel for your opponent's playstyle, you'll want to use your Earthquake proactively to predict their building, since the damage from the Earthquake does take a little longer to come out compared to something like the arrows. Having the Earthquake in your deck also has the added bonus of filling that void that the Log or Zap may leave in your deck by handling those small swarms anywhere in the arena. The Clone is the wild card of Clash Royale, high risk and mostly seen as a joke, but it can actually be super viable in the right situation. The Clone, as you know, duplicates every troop within its radius, making a copy that only has 1 HP. As of a recent update, champion cards can now both be mirrored and cloned as well, which is technically a slight buff to the Clone. Since the clones only have 1 HP, they're usually quite easy for your opponent to take out, but if they can't get them all for whatever reason, the results can be devastating since the clones still do full damage. The best and really only viable way to use the Clone spell effectively is to surprise your opponent, typically in decks like Lavaloon Clone or Golem Clone. The goal is to get a decently beefy push going like normal, and then when your opponent least expects it or overcommits in the other lane, drop a Clone on everything for some crazy results. The best cards to use the Clone with are cards like the Golem, Lava Hound, Giant Skeleton, Night Witch, and Balloon, since they all have death bombs, death damage, or spawned units upon death. This makes your pushes quite devastating to anyone who isn't running the arrows or evolved Zap, since they'll need multiple waves of damage to take out all the clones, and honestly just the clone death damage from the Giant Skeleton and Golem can do insane damage to your opponent's counter push or tower. Overall, the Clone is an extremely high risk, high reward card that is honestly a ton of fun to mess around with. The Void is an interesting card because when it first came out it was pretty overpowered, but it unfortunately got a bit too much of a nerf in my opinion, and now I couldn't tell you the last time I saw someone using it. Despite that, I'll still explain how to properly use it in case you want to give it a try, or in case Supercell ever decides to give it the small buff it likely needs. To start off, here's a chart that shows all of the different damage possibilities for the Void spell, since it does more damage when there are less units in its radius. The Void spell can fully counter an incoming baby dragon with very slight assistance from the crown tower, and using it on a single medium health troop like this is one of the best use cases. An even better use case that's a bit harder to control in practice is using the Void in such a way where it hits multiple units, but only one unit is inside the radius at once. For example, if a Princess, Dark Goblin, and Firecracker are all coming towards you and they're spaced just right, the Void spell could take a whole 3 of them out cleanly for only 3 elixir. Another use case that I'd recommend for the Void would be against exactly 4 units. This is because it does the same damage to 2 units, 3 units, or 4 units, so 4 is that sweet spot before the next breakpoint where you're actually getting some good damage per unit. For example, if 3 Musketeers are dropped in the back in the same lane, you can use the Void to hit them and the tower for a total of 4 targets, and the results are pretty good for 3 elixir. The Void is also incredible versus siege decks. If your opponent places an Expo or mortar with support right behind it, drop the void spell slightly toward the bridge to clip only the building itself. In this scenario, this will take off about 63% of the expo's health, or about 70% for a mortar, making them easy to finish off with something cheap, or just take them out if they've already been sitting for a little bit. The void is honestly a great way to get rid of buildings in general, since it does great damage to them for half the cost of a lightning spell. The best example of this is against the elixir collector, where it is almost completely taken out with the void for a pretty great trade. In short, be patient, aim for maximum value, and don't ever use it on 5 or more troops unless you absolutely have to. A good void can be a massive swing in your favor, where a poor one can instantly put you in an elixir deficit for the rest of the game. The vines work like a soft freeze that roots up to 3 troops in place, slowly damaging them over time. In addition, it pulls air troops to the ground for the 2-second duration of the spell, allowing them to be temporarily targeted and damaged by ground targeting units and spells. As far as damage, the vines do 2 waves of 153 damage for a total of 306 at tournament standard. This makes the vines, along with the arrows, the only other spell in the game that can fully counter the evolved skeleton army, since it'll take out the general's shield on the first wave and then kill him on the second. It's worth noting that the timing is much easier with the arrows though, due to their larger radius. The interesting thing about the vine spell is that in a way it's actually an alternative to the freeze spell, as for 1 less elixir you just get the drawback of only being able to affect 3 units at once and having a slightly shorter duration, then you get the upside of more damage and dragging air troops to the ground. Another useful way to use the vine spell is to save space in your deck by eliminating the need for as many air counters, as you can simply have a high damage card or spell paired with the vines to take out most air cards like balloons and all of the dragon cards. It's interesting that the vines were added to the game not too long after the evolved hunter, which has a very similar mechanic with his net ability, and due to this, using both of these cards together can really irritate your opponent and slow their pushes down, allowing you the upper hand in a lot of matchups. So all in all, I'd recommend using the vine spell if you're looking for an alternative to either the freeze spell or the arrows, as the vines can offer a lot of unique benefits that can't be provided by those other spells. The Goblin Barrel is one of the oldest spells in the game, and yet still proves to be quite strong. The number one thing that separates a good Goblin Barrel player from a great one is placement variety. The safe default is placing your barrel right on top of the tower. It's the most reliable and least risky. But if you always throw it there, expect your opponent to pre-log you every single time, meaning you'll just be wasting elixir and losing matches. The trick is to constantly mix it up. Use front barrels when they're expecting back ones, side barrels to mess with tornado users, and deep side throws to avoid king tower activations. A great example, if your opponent just dropped a 5 elixir card in the back, push instantly on the other lane with knight and barrel at the bridge. Even if they have log in hand, the timing can be tough, and if they panic or miss, you're looking at 600 plus damage instantly. A really good tip beyond just using tricky barrels is to put something else in log range with staggered timing. For example, if you put down a princess at the bridge and then a front barrel right after that while the barrel is still in the air, your opponent will feel like they need to wait to log both, so the princess will get some solid damage if they do wait, and if they don't, then they don't have anything good for the barrel. You can do the same thing with something like the skeleton barrel, as the awkward timing really messes with your opponent and makes it almost impossible for them to defend it without wasting elixir, since they overthink the interaction. Overall, the best way to use the Goblin Barrel is, as you might imagine, to make it as difficult to predict and defend for your opponents as possible, since if you just use it the same way every time, you'll likely never get much value from it. The Goblin Curse is one of the most creative spells in Clash Royale. For only 2 elixir, the spell has a 6-second duration, during which it deals 6 waves of 30 damage for a total of 180 damage at tournament standard. Any troops that die within the radius, whether from the spell or not, will be converted into friendly goblins. The most effective way to use the spell is obviously against cheap swarms like the skeleton army, bats, and graveyards, since all you're looking for is low health units and a lot of them, since each one will give you a full health goblin. On the other hand, using this spell against anything with decent health is likely going to be a waste of elixir, since even if they go down within the spell, you'll only get 1 or 2 goblins. This spell actually synergizes really well with the Mother Witch, since her cursed hogs and your goblins spawn simultaneously, creating insane lane control for relatively cheap. Obviously, if your opponent doesn't have much in the way of swarms, this card will be kind of useless for you. A good tip with the Goblin Curse is to pair it with another spell, either a log, arrows, or fireball, depending on what you're attacking. For example, a Goblin Curse and fireball will completely take out a group of barbarians for a -1 trade, but then you get 5 goblins out of it, so it ends up being a good trade for you. The Mirror is one of those spells that's easy to understand but incredibly deep when mastered. It simply lets you play your last card again for +1 elixir, but the timing, psychology, and value potential make it one of the best punish tools in the game when used correctly. The classic use is with bait decks. Throw a Goblin Barrel, let them log it, then instantly drop a mirrored barrel. Then their only choices are to either just eat the damage or overcommit to defend the barrel with no log. Either way, it's a win for you, plus the mirror increases the card level by 1 as well, meaning you'll get even more damage with that second barrel. The mirror also shines for outcycling counters. For instance, if your opponent's only air defense is a musketeer, mirror your minion horde after they've already used their musketeer and they'll be left with no good defensive options. The mirror is also very good against other players that are also using the mirror, as those examples we just discussed would be no sweat for your opponent if they could then just mirror their counter, leaving the interaction as an even trade, if not tilting in their favor. Another great use of the mirror is to quickly finish out a game in overtime before your opponent's push can connect. For example, if you have a fireball, you can fireball and mirror fireball, and that'll do a ton of damage, giving you the flexibility to close out games and definitely frustrate your opponent. The mirror rewards creativity and awareness. You're not just repeating your last card, you're breaking your opponent's mental map of your cycle and messing up interactions by having those level 12 cards at tournament standard. The Royal Delivery is one of those spells that feels slow and underwhelming until you learn the timing. Then it's suddenly a really strong part of your deck. The spell drops a Royal Recruit after about 3 seconds, dealing splash damage and then leaving you with a mini tank in the form of that Royal Recruit. The most important skill with Royal Delivery is predicting when to cast it. The damage of the spell is actually quite good for the cost, with the trade-off being the need to master the timing to get good value with the spell. But if you can handle the delay and get good with it, the Royal Delivery can actually punch above its weight class in terms of damage and overall value. When using the spell, you often can't just react, you have to anticipate. For example, against the Hog Rider, drop it just as the hog crosses the bridge. The impact lands right before the hit, knocking it back and allowing your tower to finish it off. The Royal Delivery can be quite effective in defending the Goblin Drill as well. Deploy the spell right when the Goblin Drill is coming towards your crown tower so that it immediately destroys the first goblin. The area damage will hurt the drill itself as well, and the Royal Recruit is actually solid at cleaning up the remaining goblins and tanking for your tower. A great synergy for this card is with the logs, since the two spells can be used in conjunction with one another to counter 3 Musketeers, Barbarians, and Zappies, which can be a good option when going against those cards. If you mess up the timing, you waste 3 elixir and get nothing, but when you land it perfectly, Royal Delivery feels like a cheat code with how much value it can get. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to see 100 Clash Royale tips to make you a better player, click this video.